At some point in the 1940s, a researcher at Syracuse University's Department of Plant Sciences sat down with data that should have changed how the world thought about food. His name was Leland Marsh. He had spent years studying a wetland plant that grows wild across North America, and the numbers he had recorded were difficult to believe. From a single acre, he had harvested 140 tons of roots. When processed into dry flour, that acre yielded approximately 32 tons of usable starch. Wheat, by comparison, produces somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds of flour per acre under good conditions. Marsh had found a plant that outproduced the world's most important grain crop by a factor that made the comparison almost uncomfortable. He published his findings, but the agricultural industry moved on without him. The plant Leland Marsh studied was cattail, the same brown, torch-shaped plant growing in the ditch behind your nearest highway exit, the same one you have driven past 10,000 times without a second thought. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why a plant with a 30,000-year track record and yield numbers that embarrass modern agriculture has spent the last century being reclassified, drained out of existence, and treated as a nuisance weed. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. There is a good chance you have seen cattail today without registering it as anything worth noticing. It grows in the standing water along roadsides. It fills the edges of retention ponds and parking lots. It colonizes the margins of slow-moving rivers, the shallow ends of farm ponds, the wet corners of fields that never quite drain properly. It is one of the most widely distributed plants on Earth, growing across North America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and South America. There is almost no temperate wetland habitat where you will not find it. The plant itself is not visually dramatic. It grows between 4 and 8 feet tall on slender stalks, with long flat leaves and the distinctive brown cylindrical seed head that gives it its name. That seed head is not decorative, it is a seed dispersal machine. Each one contains up to 300,000 individual seeds, each attached to a fine white fiber that catches wind and carries the seed for miles. A single plant can establish an entirely new colony from a single seed landing in suitable ground. The colony then spreads through underground rhizomes, horizontal root stems that push outward year after year through the mud, generating new shoots as they go. You do not need to replant cattail. Once it is established, the work of expansion is entirely the plant's own. The scientific name is Typha. In North America, the most common species are Typha latifolia, the broadleaf cattail, and Typha domingensis, the southern cattail, both native to the continent. A third species, Typha angustifolia, was introduced from Europe in the mid-1800s and has since hybridized with the native varieties to produce Typha x glauca, which spreads more aggressively than either parent plant. The result is a genus that grows faster, spreads wider, and tolerates more environmental stress than almost anything competing with it in wetland ecosystems. But none of these is why it matters. It matters because the underground rhizomes, those horizontal root stems spreading through the mud, are packed with starch. And that starch, when processed correctly, becomes flour. And those numbers are worth sitting with for a moment. You see, the yield comparison between cattail and wheat is not subtle. USDA plant guides confirm that 1 acre of cattails yields approximately 6,475 pounds of flour. Sourcing the figure from botanist H.D. Harrington's research and corroborated by Leland Marsh's work at Syracuse University. Wheat produces between 200 and 400 pounds of flour per acre, depending on variety, soil quality, rainfall, and inputs. The gap is not a rounding error. It is a structural difference in how these two plants store energy and how efficiently that energy can be extracted. The nutritional composition of cattail flour holds up alongside conventional alternatives. The flour contains roughly 80% carbohydrates and between 6 and 8% protein. The caloric density is comparable to wheat flour. The starch content in the rhizomes sits between 30 and 46%, varying by species, season, and growing conditions. It processes cleanly and has a mild, slightly sweet flavor that does not interfere with most recipes. Then there is one property of cattail flour that the global food industry has somehow managed to entirely ignore. It contains no gluten. It is naturally, structurally gluten-free. Not because it has been processed to remove gluten, but because the plant never had it. This places cattail flour inside one of the fastest growing segments of the food market. The global gluten-free flour market was valued at approximately $7.4 billion in 2024 and is projected to reach $14.6 billion by 2034. That market is currently dominated by almond flour, rice flour, coconut flour, and various ancient grain alternatives. Cattail appears in none of the market reports. Not in a footnote, not as an emerging trend, nowhere. The timing of this gap matters more than it might seem. Research published in peer-reviewed journals now shows that global wheat yields decline between 4 and 6% for every 1 degree Celsius of warming. Extreme heat events have pushed that figure higher in vulnerable regions, with yield drops of 20 to 50% recorded in recent decades. Climate projections indicate that the most productive wheat-growing regions in South Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East face the most severe pressure over the coming decades. The world is looking for alternatives to wheat. It is spending billions of dollars researching quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat, and teff, all of which require cultivation, annual inputs, seed purchase, irrigation, and supply chains. The plant that requires none of those things is growing in the drainage ditch at the edge of the research farm. But there is a problem, though. Cattail is a bioaccumulator. This is not a minor detail buried in a footnote. It is one of the primary reasons the plant is used in constructed wetlands for water treatment purposes around the world. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have confirmed that Typha species, all 3 major varieties, actively pull heavy metals out of contaminated water and concentrate them in their tissue. A study analyzing cattail grown in a landfill leachate treatment wetland in France measured accumulation of aluminum, cadmium, chromium, copper, mercury, manganese, nickel, lead, and zinc across the plant's roots, rhizomes, and leaves. A University of Florida analysis confirmed that all 3 Typha species show the same consistent pattern: high tolerance to metal contamination, bulk concentration of heavy metals in the roots and rhizomes, and restricted translocation of those metals into the upper leaves and stems. The rhizomes are the part used for flour. They are also the part where metal concentrations are highest. This does not mean cattail flour is inherently unsafe. It means that where you harvest determines what you get. Cattail growing in a pristine mountain wetland with clean water and uncontaminated sediment produces rhizomes with negligible metal content. Cattail growing downstream from an industrial facility, in a municipal drainage channel, or in a wetland receiving heavy agricultural runoff is a different situation entirely. Forager and author Samuel Thayer, whose book The Forager's Harvest remains the most cited practical guide to wild plant harvesting, states the principle plainly: choose your location carefully. Not every ditch qualifies. This is the legitimate obstacle. It is real, it is important, and it requires honest sourcing decisions. But it is also a solvable problem. Knowing where your water comes from and what flows into it is not a specialist skill. It is the same basic question anyone growing food in soil needs to answer about their soil. What comes next is a different kind of problem, not a natural property of the plant. Something else entirely. The Biloncino grinding stones are 30,000 years old. The indigenous peoples of North America, the Apache, Pomo, Lumbee, and Cahuilla, among many others, were processing cattail rhizomes into flour for millennia before European contact. Around Lake Titicaca in South America, the same practice developed independently. The Noongar people of southwestern Australia used cattail roots as a primary carbohydrate source. This was not regional knowledge. It was distributed across continents and cultures and oral traditions, developed separately and arriving at the same answer. This plant feeds people reliably and abundantly. By the 20th century, most of that knowledge was functionally gone in the places where European colonization had taken root. The mechanism by which it disappeared was not gradual cultural drift. It was deliberate, and it was fast. Research published in BMC Public Health and Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems documents the process with precision. Colonial governments banned access to traditional harvesting landscapes. They imposed restrictions on the burning and flooding practices that indigenous communities used to maintain wetland habitats. They privatized land that had been held communally, severing the physical relationship between communities and the ecosystems they had managed and eaten from for generations. Then came the residential school system. Tongva educator Barbara Drake described what happened in a PBS documentary. Children were taken, plants were taken. Parents and children no longer gathered together. They no longer shared language or knowledge about the land. A generation was broken off from the one before it, deliberately, in the span of a decade. The knowledge that had survived 30,000 years did not survive that. Then the land itself was transformed. More than 90% of wetlands in urbanized areas of the United States were drained over the 2 centuries following European settlement. The cattail habitat that had supplied indigenous communities was converted to agricultural fields growing annual crops, corn, wheat, soybeans, that require seed purchased every season, fertilizer applied every season, and pesticides sprayed every season. Every transaction in that cycle generates revenue. Cattail generates none. The surviving cattail populations were reclassified. No longer a food plant. Now an invasive nuisance. Government agencies today publish management guides on how to kill cattail, herbicide schedules, mechanical removal protocols, controlled burn recommendations. The USGS has even published peer-reviewed research specifically focused on Typha invasion control. Public money funds the removal of the most productive flower plant on Earth from the wetlands that remain. The research funding followed the same logic. An agricultural institution that receives grants from seed companies and chemical manufacturers has no financial incentive to investigate a plant that cannot be patented, cannot be sold as seed, and cannot create a recurring commercial relationship with farmers. The Leland Marsh findings from Syracuse sat in archived records. The agricultural extension services that distribute research to farmers had no mechanism to carry information about a plant that generated no industry interest. What gets funded gets studied. What gets studied gets known. What never gets funded disappears into university archives and indigenous oral traditions that the same institutions spent a century dismissing. Which brings us to the part that actually matters to anyone willing to get their boots muddy. The harvesting process is physical and seasonal. Cattail rhizomes run horizontally through mud at depths of 6 inches to 2 feet, with peak starch content in late fall through early spring when the plant stores its energy underground for winter. You wade out to where the stand meets open water, follow a stem down into the mud, and pull up the horizontal root running away from the plant. It comes up heavy and coated in sediment. Processing is straightforward. Break the peeled rhizome cores into cold water. The starch sinks. The fiber floats. Pour off the fiber, decant the water, and let the starch settle into a paste. Dried in the sun or at low heat, that paste becomes flour. Mild, slightly sweet, and a direct substitute for wheat in flatbreads, pancakes, and soups. Blended half and half with conventional flour, it holds up in most baked goods. In early summer, the plant offers a second harvest with almost no effort. The male flower heads fill with bright yellow pollen that shakes loose into any container. Several pounds in under an hour. It adds protein to anything you bake with it. A pound of almond flour costs between $6 and $12. A pound of rice flour runs $2 to $4. A pound of cattail flour costs nothing but an afternoon and clean water from an uncontaminated source. The infrastructure for scaling this beyond the backyard does not yet exist in any formal way. Community harvesting models, small farm wetland integration, municipal wetland restoration with food production built in. These are frameworks being developed right now inside indigenous food sovereignty movements across North America. No institution with serious funding has committed to solving it. The reason is the same one that runs through this entire story. You cannot patent a plant that spreads itself for free. And you cannot build a recurring revenue model around a root that has been feeding people without any help from anyone for 30,000 years. And that's it. Now ask yourself, what else is the $260 billion flower industry hoping you never look up? Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more.